to us from Luke 15:11 through 22. If you'd like to follow along, it's on page 740 in your pew Bibles. Jesus had been talking parables to his disciples, and he continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long ways off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet.'"
It was a cold, gray December day, as only Missouri can produce them. The sky was gunmetal colored with a bright spot where the sun might be. And Matt, who was 6 years old, was underfoot. So I don't think I actually said get lost. But I think I suggested that he go out and play with the dogs for a while. So he went out and we got all the stuff together. About 11 o'clock, we were ready to go, and Matt wasn't in the house. And he wasn't in the front yard. He wasn't in the backyard. He wasn't out by the barn. And the dogs were gone too. Sherry and I got so anxious, we ran out into the woods. We were going to find him. We raced through the woods, yelling, whistling, calling. We ran back to the farm. Grandpa Jack had done the right thing. He called the sheriff. And Deputy Brown's car was already in the drive. And Deputy Brown had called the airport and got a helicopter and a search plane. He called the radio station. They were putting it on the air. People started showing up. He also called the horse club, and they'd be coming soon. He called the boys' reform school down in Boonville, and they were going to bring a dog out, a search dog. And then the dog arrived. Sherry found a sock of Matt's, and the dog took a cursory sniff and then just trotted out towards the woods. And then everybody headed out. Sherry and I decided it would be best just to stay put. We stood by the patrol car and listened to the radio, listening to the static, hoping to hear somebody from the airplane or a walkie-talkie report back in. And finally it did crackle life. It was the pilot. He says, "I see a boy with some dogs down here. I'm going to have to circle around to check." And a little bit later, the guy with the search dog said, "We found a track. We found a track by the creek. We're on the right track." And we were lifted up, our emotions were lifted up to the pinnacles of hope. And then the horse people came and they unloaded their horses, saddled up and headed out. And then the radio came on again. It was the guy in the airplane. He says, "Does the boy have a gun?" Wrong boy, wrong dogs. Then we got a call in from the search dog trainer. Said, "Well, old Charlie Bramer crossed the track and messed up the trail." We fell down into a valley of despair, and so it went all afternoon long. So it was almost like a surprise when one of those college kids came bursting through the brush out behind the barn, came out across the barnyard yelling, "They found him! They found him!" And I dropped my cup of coffee and I ran up to the kid and I said, "Where? Where did they find him?" And he points us back that way, about a mile and a half. And I followed his pointing, and I was running towards the brush. And he said, "The people on horseback found him. And they're coming back by way of the old county road." And it suddenly dawned on me, if I went a mile out that way, Matt would be back and I'd be lost. And we waited until the horses came parading up the asphalt road, and Matt was sitting behind the first rider, and I could see his head going back and forth because there was a half a mile of cars on both sides of the road, and he was surprised there was such a fuss going on about him. They got him up and up to us, and they lowered him down, and of course we just hugged him like crazy. Now through the whole ordeal, the local radio station sent out a remote. But once Matt was in our arms, he came up and he said, "Young man, did you know you were lost?" And Matt asked us what it was like, what it felt like to have him back. And I said, it feels like Christmas and Easter all wrapped up in one. I feel like that father in the prodigal son story. My son was lost, and now he's found. That younger son was telling him stories. I imagine he was about 18 years old. That's pretty much the way I felt when I was 18. Dad was stupid. Mom was a nag. Life was boring, boring, boring. Couldn't wait to get away, get to the big city and be independent. This dad sat down and wrote out the check. The kid takes a couple of days, get down to the bank, cash the check, and he heads off to the bright lights. And life is exciting. When you got money, independence is easy. When you're out of money and a recession hits, independence means you're all alone. Life is like an adventure in the woods. You're 6 years old and you hurry over to this tree and feel the bark, or you see a leaf over here and you bend down and look at it, and then the dogs chase you up one hill and you chase them down another, but then you start to notice that light gray spot in the gray sky where the sun might be is coming down to the horizon, and it's getting cold, and you're hungry, and you're alone. And suddenly the dogs started this big ruckus of barking and baying, and they ran around a corner out of sight, and they came back leading a man on horseback. There you are. Your father is looking for you, and your mother wants to hold you in her arms. Let's go home.